Hey guys, welcome to book review number 84, I believe. We're getting up there. Today I'm going to be reviewing Frontiers of Heaven, A Journey to the End of China by Stanley Stewart. This book was written in 1995, so kind of like right in the clutch period between kind of old China and modern China, which you see a lot throughout the book. Anyway, what Stanley does is he starts his journey in Shanghai, goes up the Yangtze River to Chongqing, and then kind of takes the overland Silk Road route to, let's see, Kashgar and like the far west of China, and then eventually winds up in the Northwest Territories, or Northwest Territories, Northern Territories of Pakistan, which kind of ends the book. Well, anyway, the first part of the book kind of covers his journey up the Yangtze River, and what I remember of this is just kind of a comparison to Paul Theroux's Sailing Through China. He seemed to be less on a luxury yacht and more just kind of on standard transportation. He did mention that there was a soldier they saw that was his girlfriend was very distraught to see him go, but the soldier was just kind of very blank-faced. And even when he talked to Stanley, he even said so, just how he didn't care. So I guess that's the soldiering lifestyle. And the other kind of, I know that's not a great story, but it read better in the book. And the other one was there were 2 or 3 kind of beautiful women that were, if not supermodels, kind of like almost there, sort of like fake supermodels, or, I mean, you know the type, women that think they're supermodels. And what I found particularly interesting about this is, of course, this exists in every Western culture. We know of the vain woman. I mean, not to say all women are vain, but there's, you know, like a certain sector of women out there that undeniably are vain. But what was really interesting about this was how China was just coming out of communism. So these women were just kind of the first generation, or really first decade of women that vanity was a thing. Obviously in Mao's time, the Mao suit that was worn by both men and women being the stylistic choice, or not really choice, but dictate of the people of China. I should also mention that I spent some time in Shanghai and Shouju. Specifically what I remember, Shouju being the kind of old imperial city where there were lots of gardens and things. Some of it destroyed by the Red Guard, but still very beautiful. Still considered the garden city of China. It sits on a lake, so there's like a lot of canals and kind of waterworks among very decorative lawns and secret pathways and, you know, shrubbery and all that kind of stuff, greenery. But what he mentioned in Shanghai was just sort of the old and the new, how he started the book, how the Bund, which existed as kind of this crazy import-export place in the 1920s, has kind of started to come around, and actually, like I said, this was written in 95, has now really come around to its old party days, whereas in the middle part of the 20th century, it kind of rested in wait. So eventually, I kind of went back to Shanghai, eventually gets on to Chongqing, doesn't spend much time there, says it's gray, dirty, and just kind of not a very good place. So eventually takes the train up to Xi'an. Now why Xi'an is important is, one, it used to be the old capital of China with the old city walls and a lot of the terracotta warriors, the famous terracotta warriors. But more importantly, it was sort of the end point of the Silk Road. I guess the Silk Road continued via, you know, obviously the goods that they carried into the rest of China, but it was kind of the point where, like, the road outside the mouth of China, as the Chinese people call the area to the west, that's kind of where it ended. Or if you're going in the opposite direction, that's where it began. And obviously, you don't want to be outside the mouth. You want to be in the mouth. That's kind of much of a mixed metaphor as that is. But anyway, he has a liaison with a beautiful woman there. A sexual affair, I should mention. Sounded like a fourth grade teacher there. But it's I should stop saying so much too. It's kind of a dashing woman, and he thinks even about ending the book, ending his diaries to spend further time with this woman, but it's sort of like a tragically fated romance in that he knows that he has to be elsewhere, not only for this book, but in terms of life commitments. Now he's a single man, but he has commitments beyond Zien, and she is a woman that is kind of stuck in an art institution there, kind of in a educational way, and just because of her circumstances can't exactly leave either. So they're fated for the short time that they have there in a romantic kind of tour de force that they sneak around, and she has to be very careful because she can't be associated with a foreigner, even though, because family ties are very important. And just in general in China, reputation is very important. Obviously, she wouldn't want to ruin her reputation by being known to be sleeping with a foreign devil. And that's not to say that she was against it, but there could be shame brought to her family. Anyway, enough of that. He gets on the Silk Road, visits a couple interesting places. Zaihe, which is one of the 3 or 4 largest Buddhist monasteries in the world, and particularly obviously being the Asiatic region. I think one of them is actually in Ulaanbaatar, which is way up north in Mongolia. But the rest are sort of in the center of Tibet, kind of in Lhasa or Lhotse or Shatsay. But the interesting thing about Zaihe is it's really a very, very large monastery, large number of monks, now not as many as pre-communist revolution, but kind of on the edge of Tibet. He really never visited Tibet, though he kind of skirted the northern border of it while going along the Silk Road. Obviously, the mountains from Tibet in an area that's largely very, very desert, gets almost no rain. Some of the snow melt that comes out of the mountains every spring provides oasis towns along the southern route of the Silk Road, no, he actually goes the northern route, but still provides a lot of oases along the way. So, let's see, he visits Juyuan and Jiyuang, Jiayuguan, kind of dust-filled towns in the middle of nowhere. I believe there are some forts in these areas. And this is also the area that he said he saw the strangest person ever. Now, in this part of the Silk Road, they're primarily going east-west. East to China, west to the west to, Central Asia and eventually Europe. So very few people travel north-south, maybe like Genghis Khan up to Mongolia, a few Tibetans from Mongolia down south, and then a few Tibetans up to Mongolia. But for the most part, 99% of traffic is on east-west. And so he saw a non-Tibetan Buddhist, just this kind of crazy man, and this really stuck with me, wander out to the middle of nowhere, and I want to make sure that this is still running. Wandering out to the middle of nowhere, it is, and and was just taking photographs, and I don't think he spoke Chinese or Mandarin, and Stanley didn't speak whatever language he was trying to speak, and so they just conversed in the very few words of English that the kind of crazed man knew. But all he wanted was a photograph, and then he just wandered off into the desert, which is just kind of the strangest, most surreal thing. Okay, well anyway, he moves on to, that's enough of that story. He moves on to, I'm trying to figure out where this is. I believe it is Li Yuan? Oh no, it's Dunhuan, which is where the Mao Guan, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Ma Guan caves are, which are one of the most famous Buddhist caves in the entire world. He sees a lot of the frescoes, and what's really interesting is you have the starkness of the outside light. It's all yellows, not trees in sight, in the desert. You do have some mountains in the background, but it's very, very desolate. And then you go into these caves, and one of the reasons that these caves were preserved as long as they were is because they were along the Silk Road, which for a time carried Buddhism primarily along its route until Islam came into prominence later on. But unlike Buddhism in China, which still has a lot of relics, but over the time, wars and all that stuff kind of really destroy a lot of stuff. By this point, Stanley was like out on the Silk Road. So he was enough away from it or this part of the Silk Road was enough away from civilization that kind of the wars that would typically destroy historic sites didn't visit this area. That is until the early 1900s, when not really a war or destruction, but pillaging anthropologists from, you bet, England, as well as France and Germany, came in, really desecrated this religious site that had all these frescoes, all these famous paintings, some of the original documents that helped the spread of, and he's mentioned a specific monk whose name I can't remember in here, who's like really famous for spreading Buddhism from more or less the Indian subcontinent to China, and which is why China is primarily Buddhist. Some of his original documents and texts, they stole almost all of them. So now there's still some frescoes on the wall, but there's many like statues with their heads missing. But even so, Stanley said it was really impressive kind of going into these caves after the blinding light of the outside, the kind of dark, overwhelming world of art that existed within them. Okay, next he goes on to, he goes on to a couple places, but I'm not going to name them all. Like Burke Hall, like up in the north, kind of desolate. Yeah. Oh, I think one of these places, I think it's Jaime or Burke Hall, it begins with a J, but it's some J name. I wish I had these written down. If you know anything about Chinese history, just try J name or whatever. But what's really famous is as the Great Wall continues to the west, it kind of merges up with the Silk Road, particularly once you get west of, once you really get to the Silk Road part of the Silk Road outside of Chinese proper, really the Great Wall and the Silk Road kind of very close to one another. But at this point is when the Great Wall ends, and although he's been on the Silk Road for a while now, and really outside Chinese civilization, this is considered the true demarcation point of China. And now the Great Wall of China continues from in the east near Beijing, has these large, fortified, very grandiose walls. But as you get further west, they become earthen mounds, they become much more diminished, which is why it's a little bit surprising the ornamentation and large size of this fort that exists as the last place along the Silk Road. And I guess it's not so surprising, because you would figure the last place along the Silk Road, they would want a strong defense, high walls. I think they're like 15-foot high walls with very thick, maybe like 7 or 8 feet, and a very, very large encumbered fortress. And so he has some thoughts just kind of on that and the fact that he's now out of the lion's mouth. Next he goes to Turfan, which is one of the places I want to visit in my lifetime. It's a bucket list place. Primarily because it's one of the driest places on earth, but also has one of the greatest irrigation and one of the original irrigation places on earth, in that it's right next to a mountain that gets a fair amount of snow because it's high up. And so the snow melt comes off, and what's actually happened is these people that lived there pre-Chinese civilization built these irrigation canals under the ground so that the water wouldn't evaporate. leading to great vineyards. And actually, there's vineyards not only outside the city, but in the city themselves. Matter of fact, many of the roads in the city, and it's really beautiful to see, are covered by grapevines. And it provides shade. It's very relaxed, very languorous, I believe that's the word. So it's a really cool place. And just a place that's kind of a counter to the starkness and death, like deserty death that you experience throughout most of the Zhang, or Turkestan, which is now known as the Jiangxi Uyghur Autonomous Republic. Heads next to Urumqi, which he just avoids completely. He says something about some morgue there, but it's the capital and the largest city, but also just kind of a disgusting example of modernity. Not that it's necessarily dirty, or at least any more dirty than other Chinese cities, which has a reputation for being dirty, but just has no soul. It's just completely like, oh, whatever, we're just going to settle a bunch of Chinese people out here. I should mention at this point that the Uyghurs, which are related to the Turkmen or Turkish people, are the primary native inhabitants, but have actually recently been overtaken in modern times in terms of population numbers by Han Chinese coming out from the east via settlements. But if the Han Chinese are known for one thing, it's not necessarily like when they have an old community or an old village, it tends to be very picturesque. But when it's a new village, it's pretty ugly. It's modernity at its ugliest. So next he goes almost to the border with Kazakhstan and sees some of the Russian villages that still exist. I think he says there's like 20 people in this town of Ili that are, or maybe 20 families that are native Russian. Now it's a lot larger city than that, maybe like 20,000 people. But he kind of finds these enclaves, which I find interesting too, of Russians that are just kind of held on through all the bad times, the communist revolutions, both in Russia and in China, the Warring States periods, the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward. Just it's all, they've held out. Goes along, visits a few other places. I don't want to go into all of them. Eventually winds up at Kashgar with its giant market. Let's make sure this is still going on. Woo, still recording. Winds up at Kashgar with its giant market. Sees sheep, goats, bulls. It's really crazy. It's more like a Middle Eastern bazaar than it is anything even remotely close to China. And that's what he really gets. He gets the frontiers of heaven, beyond the mouth, or whatever. Then eventually goes south over the Kuna Jarab, I believe that's how you pronounce it, pass, seeing some native nomads, and actually kind of had this crazy wedding experience. Not that he was married, but he saw somebody else getting married, and they had a big feast that he enjoyed kind of at 15,000 feet out in the middle of this giant, at this point it's not really desert, it can be like high desert, but complete emptiness of mountains and high plateau. Eventually crosses over to India, where he says things become immediately more recognizable. Stanley being British and the British influence of the Raj. Still, although Pakistan is an independent country, maybe there's some standardization of the Raj that still exists. Sees a game of polo in Gilmet. I've covered over some of this other stuff in some of the other books. Sees Islamabad, Taxtilia, which is like the old city right next to Islamabad. Islamabad being the new capital city that has a lot of intrigue behind the scenes, but is completely devoid of interesting things for somebody that isn't a political insider. So like Musharraf and well, not Jinnah, but all of the Pakistani leaders, there's a lot of assassinations and coups d'etats in Pakistan, but they all exist in a city that's pretty boring. But he likes Taxtilia. That's an old town in the area, and that's kind of where he ends the book. He ends the book thinking about what happened in Shanghai and thinking about his last place in Islamabad, and drawing a big circle together, and that was the end of the book. So anyway, before I run out of battery on my camera, Frontiers of Heaven, A Journey to the End of China by Stanley Stewart. It's a good one. This has been a long review, but it's worth it. It's actually, even though I've talked a long time, it's only 200 some odd pages. 210s or something. But anyway, check it out. Once again, Frontiers of Heaven, A Journey to the End of China by Stanley Stewart. Winner of the Thomas Cook Travel Book of the Year Award. Yeah, it's a good one. All right, check it out, you guys.